Okie dokie, A pushers. Here we go. The election we've been waiting for. The Revolution of 1800. Bum, ba-da-da! The revolutionary moment because it wasn't a revolution. So this is sometimes the election of 1800 is sometimes called a revolution because something revolutionary happens. And the revolutionary thing that happens is there's not a revolution at the end of this election, which is remarkable and historic because this has never really happened before. So here we go. This is who our election is between. This quasi war with France is not going well. If you remember back to the readings, we talked about the readings talked about John Adams and the XYZ affair. He tries to get this. He tries to finish a treaty with France. France is the last major European power that the United States does not have a treaty with. Remember, Washington gets a treaty with England. Washington gets a treaty with Spain, and Adams tries to complete the trifecta by getting a treaty with France, which would be the last major European power. It doesn't go well. France wants a bribery. Things are chaotic. It's a bloodbath in France. People's heads are popping off all the time. And we get into this quasi war, this undeclared war against France. That's not really going well. We're losing. France is taking over ships, American ships on the high seas. So that's not going well for the United States. And then we have this very bizarre Alien and Sedition Act, which is pushed on Adams by Hamilton, and it's a disaster for the Adams administration. They bitterly divided the nation. They're extraordinarily unpopular. They seem to fly in the face of everything that the United States was founded on. So that's not going well. So nothing seems to be going well for Adams. On top of that, Adams's once BFF, like they went to Starbucks every Saturday and got a coffee and sat down and gossiped with each other during on Saturdays. His once BFF, Tommy J, Thomas Jefferson, who is his vice president. Remember, we have this very weird quirk in the Constitution that whoever comes in second in presidential voting automatically becomes the vice president. Because of that very weird quirk, Tommy J is Adams's vice president. John Adams doesn't like Tommy J at this point. Tommy J doesn't like John Adams. It's a very, very bitter political feud between these two, and their personal relationship is broken as well. So that's not going well. And Tommy J, if you remember in 1796, he didn't want to be president. He just wanted to go back to Monticello and do whatever it was that he did in Monticello. But the Democratic Republicans run him for president anyways. And he ends up being vice president. So even though he didn't want to be president in 1796, because of the Alien and Sedition Acts, Thomas Jefferson is now actively and vigorously pursuing the presidency in 1800. He is going after the presidency, if for no other reason other than to get rid of John Adams. And what we get is a very bizarre, very bitter, very negative, very mean-spirited campaign that even today, if we were to look at the political campaigns that have taken place today or in recent history, even today, this election between these two in 1800 is extraordinarily bad and is extraordinarily scandalous and extraordinarily negative. So let's get to it. What was it that Tommy J and his supporters were saying about John Adams? Well, they level all sorts of accusations against John Adams. One, that he was accused of being a very abusive, neglectful husband. That he beat Abigail Adams, that he ignored Abigail Adams, that he was just, for all intents and purposes, a completely and totally horrific husband. There were accusations that he supplied visiting Russian diplomats who came over during his presidency, that he supplied them with very, very young prostitutes for their whatever. So there was that accusation. He was accused of being a spy uh, or an agent for England. And it's also alluded to, although it's never directly expressed, it is alluded to in a lot of campaign literature and a lot of campaign speeches by Tommy J and his supporters that John Adams was a hermaphrodite. Wow. So let's go through these. The accusation that John Adams was an abusive and neglectful husband. That's not true. He and Abigail Adams were extraordinarily close and very, 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 very much in love. They had a very passionate, very intense love affair and relationship with one another. Where this comes from is that John Adams, just because of the reality of the day in the late 1700s, would be away from Abigail Adams for months and sometimes years at a time without seeing her, because he would be away in England, or he would be away in Philadelphia, or he'd be away in New York City while she was back in Massachusetts. And just the reality of the time didn't allow him to go home a lot during those occasions. So he was gone for months or years at a time. But during those times, they wrote some very, very intense, very, very passionate, very, very, at times graphic letters to one another. So that's not really true. Having supplied Russian diplomats with very, very young prostitutes, that's absolutely, there is no shred of evidence at all that that was ever true. There were Russian diplomats that came and visited John Adams during his presidency, but there's no evidence whatsoever that John Adams ever did that. And that certainly would seem to be out of character with John Adams. That he was an agent of England. He was very close to England. He was the U.S. ambassador to England. He certainly felt closer to England than he did to France, but that he was an agent or a spy of England, not true. And that he was a hermaphrodite, no, absolutely not true. But it's a good story. So what did they say about against Tommy J? So here's what they said about Tommy J: that he stole money from a widow and her children. Ooh, well, that's pretty serious. That he was a coward. Oh, well, that's pretty serious. He was an agent of France. Oh, boy. He was a slave lover. Mm. And he was an atheist. Oh, so these are pretty damning, pretty serious allegations as well. So let's go through these. He stole money from a widow and her children. Kind of, but not really. So here's the story. What would essentially be his neighbor when he was in Monticello, her husband died. And at that time, the way inheritance laws were written, women could not inherit property or money. That just wasn't possible. And her children were not old enough to inherit any of her husband's property or wealth. So what she did, she asked Thomas Jefferson if he would be the caretaker of the estate, essentially that the estate would be signed over to him and he would take care of it until her oldest son was old enough to assume the estate. And he did that. And he gave them money, kind of an allowance for them to survive, to pay their bills and whatever they needed to do. And then once her oldest son was old enough, he did sign the estate back over to her. So did he take money from a widow and her children? Yeah, I guess. But that's just the way things worked at that time. Did he steal it and use it for his own benefit? No, he did not. He was a coward. He did not serve in the American Revolution. He didn't go off and fight. He was the governor of Virginia during the American Revolution, and his governorship as um, um, as the governor of Virginia during the American Revolution was pretty disastrous. It was very disastrous. And there were accounts of him running away into the woods when the British were invading Richmond in Virginia. Was he a coward? I don't know. He didn't serve. And there's certainly stories of him running the opposite way when the British were invading, but that's interpretation. He was an agent of France. He was the ambassador to France. He loved France. He was enamored with France. He loved everything and anything that was France. Um, he advocated on behalf of France. He thought the French Revolution was fantastic, even when it spiraled into a bloody chaos of daily beheadings and just crazy, crazy things. He thought that was great. Was he a spy for France? Mm-hmm. Did he work in favor of France against the United States? Probably not. But he did love France. John Adams didn't necessarily. He liked England, but he didn't like England the same way that Tommy J liked France. He was a slave lover. That's true. Thomas Jefferson's wife dies in childbirth as a complication of childbirth, which was pretty common back then. And Thomas Jefferson eventually takes up with a young slave of his, Sally Hemings, 13 years old at the time. And there were rumblings from the beginning that she was a little bit more than a slave. When Thomas Jefferson is the ambassador to France, he takes with him none of his slaves except for Sally Hemings, who was still a very young teenager when they go to France. While he's in France, it is reported that Sally Hemings doesn't appear to live as a slave, but appears to live as a companion to Thomas Jefferson. When they return from France, Sally Hemings has several young children that she didn't have when she left for France. And it was very apparent that Thomas Jefferson treated Sally Hemings and her children much differently than he treated the rest of his slaves. And just recently, like within the last, 15, 20 years, DNA results have proven that descendants of Sally Hemings, direct descendants of Sally Hemings, are also descendants of Thomas Jefferson. Huh. So was he a slave lover? Yes, he was. He was an atheist. He seemed to be more of what most of the founding fathers were. Most of the founding fathers were not Christians in the sense that we would think of Christians. Most of the founding fathers were what were called deists. And deists are people who believe that there is some sort of supreme being, some sort of higher power, kind of making things happen in the universe. So was he an atheist? Probably not. But was he a Christian? Probably not. Thomas Jefferson had a Bible, and he read the Bible, and he had a lot of problems with a lot of the supernatural miracle things that happened in the Bible, like Moses parting the Red Seas and Jesus raising people from the dead and Jesus coming back from the dead and things like that. He just didn't understand how those things were scientifically possible. So what Thomas Jefferson did, everything in the Bible that didn't make sense to him or he didn't believe were scientifically possible, he cut out of the book, out of the Bible. And you can see it today. You can go on Amazon and you can buy the Jefferson Bible, which is essentially the Christian Bible with all of the supernatural events cut out of it. And you can see, if you go to Monticello, you can see the original Bible where he meticulously cut out all of these passages in the Bible. It just didn't make sense to him. So was he an atheist? Probably not. He was a deist. He did seem to believe in a higher power. He wrote about a higher power and some sort of supreme being. Did he believe in a Christian God? Was he a Christian? Probably not. So these accusations against Jefferson are much more accurate than the accusations against Adams, which were, for the most part, just entirely wackadoo. All right, so let's talk about this. So we have this very bizarre situation in the Constitution, which has very quickly proven to be very problematic. And that is that whoever comes in second in the presidential election becomes vice president. This has already become a problem, and we're only on our second president, right? Thomas Jefferson, a vice president for John Adams. That's not working, and everybody realizes very quickly. So what the parties do, we've now split into parties. The Democratic Republicans, also known as Jeffersonians, and the Federalists. Okay? Understand real quick, neither political parties, Republicans or Democrats, modern day Republicans, modern day Democrats, really can be traced directly back to either of these two parties. Okay, just understand that. So we have the Republican Democrats, who are sometimes known as the Jeffersonians, and then we have the Federalists, which is Adams. So what they do, realizing that this is very problematic about the top vote getter, top two vote getters being president, vice president, both parties nominate two candidates to be president, hoping that those two candidates will come in number one and number two. And then we will have a president and vice president of the same party, same ideology. Certainly, there are preferred candidates for president. So here's how the presidential ballot looks in 1800. For the Democratic Republicans, we have Thomas Jefferson, the preferred candidate. And then also running for president is Aaron Burr. Oh, we will talk about Aaron Burr here in a second. For the Federalists, we have John Adams, the preferred candidate, incumbent president. And the other candidate is Charles Pinckney, who wrote the Pinckney Treaty under George Washington. So the Democratic Republicans are hoping Thomas Jefferson comes in number one, Aaron Burr comes in number two. The Federalists are hoping that John Adams comes in number one, and Charles Pinckney comes in number two. Everybody good? Okay, here we go. So here's how the election shakes out. Thomas Jefferson comes in first. Aaron Burr ties. John Adams comes in third. Thomas Pinckney comes in fourth. So the plan kind of worked, right? Both top vote getters are from the same party. Jefferson and Burr are both Democratic Republicans. Yay! John Adams, the current sitting president, comes in third in the presidential election. John Adams is out. Thomas Pinckney is out. But we have a real problem. Jefferson and Burr have essentially tied. Oh boy. So we look at the Constitution. What does the Constitution say about presidential tie? According to the Constitution, presidential election ties are broken by a vote in the House of Representatives. House of Representatives will cast the deciding vote. At this time, the leader of the House, the Speaker of the House, has a lot of power and will control the vote. The Speaker of the House, at this time, outside of the President of the United States, the Speaker of the House was the most powerful position in the country. And this particular Speaker of the House has a lot of power. And this particular Speaker of the House will control the vote. Here's the Speaker of the House. Alexander Hamilton. Oh boy. We know Alexander Hamilton and Tommy J don't get along. Oh no. We know he hates Tommy J. We know he hates his politics. We know Thomas Jefferson hates Alexander Hamilton, and he hates Alexander Hamilton's politics. However, Hamilton absolutely, completely despises Aaron Burr and sees Aaron Burr as unpredictable. You can't trust him. The guy's a lunatic. He's a couple of burgers short of a Happy Meal. Aaron Burr is somebody who absolutely, positively, completely, totally cannot ever assume any power at all. So Alexander Hamilton tells the House of Representatives, you will vote for Tommy J to be president. I may not like Tommy J's politics. I may not like Tommy J personally, but Tommy J is not a lunatic. Tommy J will not completely destroy this country. Aaron Burr, he will. Oh boy. Aaron Burr is furious over this. Aaron Burr desperately wanted to be president, and he tells Alexander Hamilton, both of them happen to be from New York. Remember that. Aaron Burr tells Alexander Hamilton, if you ever cross me again, I will kill you. All right, so let's talk about what happens. So now Adams has lost. The Federalists are out of power. The question is, will John Adams leave power peacefully? Never in the history of the world to this point had one faction or one group peacefully leave power. Usually, when there's a transfer of power between one group or one faction and another group or another faction, it is a revolution. It is bloody. It is there are deaths. There is a terrible, terrible, terrible violent reaction to this. So everybody waits and holds their breath. This is a brand new country. We are young, 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 young. Will John Adams leave power peacefully, or will he barricade himself in the White House and refuse to go and have to forcibly be pushed out? John Adams leaves peacefully. There is no revolution. There is no bloodshed. There is no fighting. There are no deaths. There is no revolution. John Adams accepts the results of the election and he leaves. However, before he leaves, literally up to the midnight hour, Adams is in power until midnight in March, some date in March. And his presidency will end at midnight. Literally all the way up to that midnight hour, John Adams is furiously appointing and nominating federal judges across the country to all of these new judgeships across the country. Remember, federal judges are in office for life. You can't vote them out. You can't remove them unless they do crazy stuff. Once you're a federal judge, you're there for life. And John Adams does this hoping that at least the Federalist Party, which has now lost the legislative branch as well as the executive branch, that the Federalist Party will at least hold on to the judicial branch, that the Federalist Party will still have some influence in the government by appointing all of these judges at the last minute, last hour. Adams leaves the White House, making the way for Thomas Jefferson, Tommy J, and the Democratic Republicans to take over. There is no violence. There is no bloodshed. There is no revolution. It's a peaceful transfer of power, something that had never happened ever to that point. All right, so now we've got all these judges, and it leads to the first major civil rights case, Marbury versus Madison. You should know this. This is pretty important. AP seems to like Marbury versus Madison, so just know this. So they're very angry with lots of federal judges being appointed. Okay, lots and lots of federal judges being appointed, and Thomas Jefferson feels that he's been kind of had. That he's now going to have to deal with all of these federal judges that were appointed in the waning hours of Adams's presidency. And Thomas Jefferson, when he takes over, some of these letters, some of these appointments hadn't been delivered yet. And Thomas Jefferson tells the Secretary of State, James Madison, do not deliver those appointments. I'm not going to, essentially saying, those appointments may have been made in the last hours of Adams, but they were never delivered. I'm now president. I don't want all of these Federalist judges. Do not deliver them. William Marbury, who is the gentleman you see on the left here, sued Jefferson. William Marbury knew that he had been appointed as a federal judge. Being a federal judge is a good job to have. And he sued Jefferson for not delivering the appointment. Marbury argues, I was appointed legally by a sitting president, and I should still have that judgeship. It goes all the way to the Supreme Court. This is the first big case for the Supreme Court. Before this, the Supreme Court really didn't know what they were supposed to do. They just knew that they were the top court in the land, but they didn't really know what their job was. It's never really spelled out in the Constitution. So this is the first big case for the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court rules that it was illegal for Madison not to deliver the appointment. Madison needs to deliver the appointment. However, the Supreme Court also said that it did not have the proper authority to rule in a case like this, that this case was beyond the scope of the Supreme Court, that really the Supreme Court, the job of the Supreme Court, they argue, is not to determine who's right or who's wrong. The job of the Supreme Court is what's known as judicial review. The job of the Supreme Court is to look at laws and determine if those laws are allowed under the Constitution or not allowed under the Constitution. The job of the Supreme Court is not to determine if somebody's guilty or innocent. That's not the job of the Supreme Court. The job of the Supreme Court is judicial review, to determine if laws are legal, if laws are constitutional. So the Supreme Court, on the one hand, said Thomas Jefferson should have delivered these appointments. That's their legal ruling. But the Supreme Court then, on the other hand, says, but that's really not our job. Our job is not to determine right or wrong or guilt or innocence. Our job is to determine if laws are unconstitutional or constitutional. Judicial review. Remember that. Very important. William Marbury never receives his federal judgeship. Huh. All right, so let's get to the good stuff here. Burr versus Hamilton. So Burr told Hamilton when Hamilton cost him the presidency, if you ever cross me again, I will kill you. Oof. Burr, at one point while he's vice president, runs to be the governor of New York. Hamilton lives in New York. Hamilton didn't want Burr to be president, and he certainly doesn't want Burr to be governor. So Hamilton campaigns against him. Hamilton doesn't want to be the governor of New York, but he doesn't want Burr to be it either. So Hamilton actively and openly campaigns against Aaron Burr and supports his opponent. And Aaron Burr loses the governorship of New York. Oh, and now Aaron Burr is furious. So Aaron Burr begins to call out Hamilton in New York newspapers. And this is how gentlemanly disputes were settled back then. You would take out essentially ads in the local newspaper, calling out whoever it was that you didn't like. And you would call them all sorts of names and you bring all these charges against them. And if whoever it was that you were calling out in your ads, if they didn't respond, then it showed that they were less than a man and they were cowardly and they were not fit to call themselves a man. So Alexander Hamilton responds. And Alexander Hamilton is an extraordinarily good writer who has a very vast uh, vocabulary and is able to insult Aaron Burr in a number of different ways and call him all sorts of very awful names in responding to Aaron Burr. So Aaron Burr responds again by taking out an ad in the newspaper by challenging Hamilton to a duel. This is how gentlemen, fine, refined gentlemen, solve their differences. They didn't throw down with each other and punch each other, and whoever is the least bloody wins. No, no, no. Fine, dignified gentlemen settle their differences like real gentlemen do. They shoot at each other. Hamilton, who has never been in a duel, does not want to be in a duel. He knows Aaron Burr has been in duels. Hamilton reluctantly accepts because if he doesn't accept, then Burr wins. Burr will be the gentleman. Burr will be the dignified, respected man about town, and Hamilton will be forever disgraced and could never again call himself a man. So Hamilton reluctantly accepts this challenge. And they set a date of July 11th, 1804 to meet for the duel. Now, duels back then, again, these are dignified, refined, gentlemanly clashes. So there are very defined rules to dueling. First off, whoever challenges the duel has to supply the weapons. So Aaron Burr has to supply the weapons. So Aaron Burr will show up with 2 pistols. A second, what they called a second, essentially like an advisor, a right-hand man for Hamilton, will then choose one of the pistols for the other dueler to use. So the challenger shows up with the 2 pistols. The person who is challenged, their advisor, their right-hand man, will select the pistol for the challenged to use. So that way, like the challenger can't show up with one pistol loaded and the other one's not, and he knows which one, right? The other person gets to select. So the second for Hamilton selects the pistol. The 2 men then meet face to face and they shake hands and they will walk off a set amount of paces, and there will be a individual, a person who has no connection to either party, will count off the paces. So they will mark off the paces, and then they turn, and this independent moderator, I guess you could say, will shout fire. All right, so here's how it works. If one of the men shoots first and misses, okay, they only get one shot in the gun. If somebody shoots first and they miss, that means that they lost the duel. And the other person who didn't get their shot off first is supposed to fire their gun into the ground as a sign of respect. Essentially, the second person is saying, I could have I could have just killed you right now. I could have lined up my shot and shot you and killed you, but I didn't. And that makes me a better man than you. You are alive today because I allowed you to live, and you will have to live with that for the rest of your life, that your life is owed to me. And that's the way these were settled. Well, Hamilton knew the rules, and Hamilton reasoned if he got his shot off, he could live with Aaron Burr saying he was the better man and Hamilton's alive because of Burr and so on and so forth. Hamilton was fine with that as long as Hamilton actually gets to live. That's all Hamilton was worried about. So they march off to Paces. The independent party yells fire. Hamilton immediately shoots his pistol into the air, and it goes through some trees and breaks off some branches and so on and so forth. And Hamilton goes, "Oh, I missed. You win." Burr did not come here simply to win. Burr came here to kill Hamilton. And Aaron Burr lines up his shot and shoots Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton will die the following day. The Vice President of the United States has just challenged the Speaker of the House to a duel and then killed him. The Vice President did this. What? At this point, Aaron Burr leaves. He begins to go up and down the Mississippi River in the newly acquired territory of the United States, and begins to try to recruit people along the Mississippi River to secede from the United States and become their own independent country along the Mississippi and declare him king. Oh boy. Alexander Hamilton eventually is arrested. He's put on trial for treason. It's a mess. Vice President of the United States shoots and kills former Secretary of the Treasury, current Speaker of the House, Alexander Hamilton. Oh boy. And those are our notes. Yay! All right. Make sure you turn them in. And take care.